Hi, I'm Executive Director Nina DeLeo, and I want to welcome you to the 45th Annual Victoria Bach Festival. Tonight, we're going to revisit a concert from June 10th, 2017, of the Victoria Bach Festival Orchestra conducted by Alejandro Hernandez-Valdez that was entitled Mexico Bello, Beautiful Mexico. And it was a concert that got a very enthusiastic response from our audiences and was also very special because it featured the US premiere of a piece called Mariachi Plan by composer Juan Pablo Contreras. Juan Pablo was there with us in Victoria that night, and he's here with us tonight to talk about that concert and revisit some of the memories and talk about Mexican composers. We want to thank our sponsors for tonight's concert, KMH Wealth Management, Keller and Associates, and the Cloyd and Ethel Lee Tracy Foundation. Our season sponsors are the O'Connor and Hewitt Foundation, the City of Victoria, and the Texas Commission on the Arts. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Juan Pablo Contreras and Alejandro Hernandez-Valdez.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Juan Pablo.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. As Nina was mentioning, we had a wonderful concert celebrating Mexican music when I first arrived as music director of the festival. And one of the first things that I wanted to make sure that I did as a new artistic director is to connect my culture to the festival, and especially since Victoria has such a high population of Mexican American folks. So I thought that would be a good way to introducing what I want to do with music and the type of energy that I want to inject in the performances that I put together. So it was really great to have the opportunity to around that time to meet Juan Pablo. I cannot remember, Juan Pablo, exactly how we met, to be quite frank. Do you?
Yes, I remember. I sent you, I had just premiered this piece, Mariachi Plan, which we'll talk about more later, but I sent you a score, and I heard a radio interview with you. I think you were interviewed in New York, and I heard that interview. I added you on Facebook and sent you the score and introduced myself, and immediately we had a phone call, and that's how the whole collaboration came about, and I'm so happy that it did.
I mean, for me, it's very vivid that moment when I opened your score and I started looking at it, and I thought, man, this guy's got technique, like tons of technique, beautiful orchestration, textures, the flow of it. It just spoke. I mean, I could hear the piece right away and how it would all come together very beautifully. So it just came exactly at the right time because, again, I was planning on doing this finale centered around Mexican music, some of the most familiar pieces from the Mexican repertoire. And I had been looking for a piece to premiere or a new piece, but something that other people would have not done. And again, your piece came like a blessing at the right time in the right place. And I'm just so glad that we were given the chance to give the American premiere.
And we have to say we're both from Jalisco, from Guadalajara. So that's
from
also
Guadalajara proper, yeah.
That was another connection that we had. We were born in the same place, and so we also had this love for mariachi and popular Mexican music, and so that also brought us together and made this premiere, this US premiere, and this concert even more special, I think.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted to showcase is the variety that exists in Mexico and its culture, because a lot of us have the tendency to think of a country as a certain, like a monolith, right? This is one thing. Yeah. And that is never the case for most cultures. And I think that is not the case at all for Mexico. It's so varied and it's so rich, and the history is so multi-layer that I think both the food and the music reflect all that. So the concert that I put together with Mexican music contained music from different styles, music that was greatly influenced by the European conquistadors, music that was very, very nationalistic, music that was pre-Hispanic, music that had Afro-American influences, such as Sensemaya, which is very present, particularly in the south of the country, since it's so close to Cuba. or Afro-Cuban rather, I should have said not Afro-American, Afro-Cuban, and also modern music, the modern Mexico, which you represent so well, of course. So the first piece that we're going to talk about, Juan Pablo, is by one of the greatest composers in Latin America, and perhaps the most successful composer in Mexico, Carlos Chavez. Carlos Chavez was born in 1899, and he had a long life. He died in 1978, I believe. A very long life, very successful. He studied piano with one of the greatest composers in Mexico too, Manuel Ponce.
Yeah.
And apparently he got a lot of help from Ponce to start his career, but he took off. And he was kind of, I think of Chavez as the Mexican Leonard Bernstein. He could do everything. He could compose, he could conduct. He was a music theorist, he was an educator, he was a journalist, and he was extremely successful in everything he did. And the piece that we're gonna hear in a few minutes, it's one of his 6 symphonies. It's the second of his 6 symphonies, and this one is called Sinfonía India, or Indian Symphony. Indian as in Mexican native, and it's a spectacular piece of music. What do you want to say about Chavez?
I always think about the strong bond that this piece has with the United States. I mean, we all know that Chavez was a very close friend of Aaron Copland, and this piece was basically modeled or inspired by Copland's Second Symphony, with his short symphony that Chavez actually premiered and conducted in Mexico City. And Chavez fell in love with this music. He said it had a bouncing quality to the music, the changing meters and the expressivity of it. And a few months later, after he premiered the piece, Chavez visited Copland in New York and was offered the opportunity to conduct some of his own music at a CBS broadcast. And he wrote Sinfonía India for this broadcast. So the piece was premiered in the United States. So it's funny that Chavez premiered his symphony in the US, Copland in Mexico. And the symphony quotes 3 ancient melodies from Mexico, specifically from the Pacific coast of Mexico. So he uses actually indigenous melodies as his source material. And also, like Copland's symphony, it's also in 3 sections. There's a fast bouncing section, there's a slow lyrical section, and at the end we conclude with a very triumphant fast section as well. So
absolutely, yeah. Now that you're mentioning the relationship with Copland, Copland thought of Chavez as one of the greatest composers alive when they were living. And as a conductor, now that you're mentioning when he conducted the NBC orchestra, he was invited by Toscanini when Toscanini took a sabbatical from the orchestra to conduct. So he was really, really highly respected. And he was also an innovator. He was one of the first people to talk and write about electronic music. He was the director of the Cabrillo Festival, one of the most important festivals in contemporary music. The Cabrillo Festival is still going strong. Marin Alsop was the last artistic director of the festival. Marin Alsop is the conductor of the Baltimore Symphony, probably the most famous, the most well-known female conductor in the world. And so Chavez had a lot of influence. Talking about Sinfonía India specifically, so he grabs these melodies from the tribes in this region, and I think he's focusing a movement on each tribe. I think Huichol is the first tribe. The Huicholes come from Nayarit, which is a state right above Jalisco, our state. And then the second movement, he focuses on Yaqui music. The Yaquis is another tribe. And then the last movement, the tunes come from the Seris. The Seris are from Baja California. It's obviously a very rich state when it comes to indigenous cultures. And anyway, so he has a kind of DNA, or 3 different DNAs going through the piece that I think make it very, very powerful, particularly for people from Mexico. What I love about that piece also is that he calls for instruments or in the percussion family that are really just bones and jars and things like that, things that you can hit. Normally when orchestras do this piece, they find substitutes, of course, for these items, because they're sometimes hard to get. But it's also very interesting how he tried to make it as authentic as possible.
And we have to say it's in a single movement, so it's in 3 parts, but there's no break, there's no interruption. It just flows as a single standing 10-minute, 12-minute piece.
Absolutely. And the piece is from 1935. He started then, he finished it in 1936, and it was premiered by the Boston Symphony. So again, an amazing work. Shall we hear a little bit of it?
And we must say that today would have been Carlos Chavez's birthday. So this is like a happy birthday, Carlos Chavez. Here's your gift. The best gift for a composer is to hear their own music played so well. So let's hear it and let's celebrate Chavez.
Let's.
That was amazing. Really, really great. What a great way to relive that concert. That piece is not easy. It looks easy, and these wonderful musicians make it look very seamless, but it's not easy to play that piece. There's a lot of mixed meter, a lot of things going on in between the beats. And I wanted to ask you, Alejandro, I was reminded that you use a very long baton. I know you've had some amazing conducting teachers. Can you tell us about that decision to use that baton? It seems very free and very communicative, but tell us about that.
Well, this particular program was very rhythmic, right? And lots of brass, people really far away that were key to keeping the rhythm just right. So I'm trying to get as much connection as possible from the tip of the baton to the people all the way in the back. And I think, I guess the determination to use a long baton was basically influenced by that. But it's one of those things that the baton really it's not as essential as what you're feeling with inside of your body. You're a conductor yourself. You know how it is. It's that inner rhythm that that purposefulness that I think you need to try to communicate to the orchestra, particularly for something like this. Something that is very tricky, where if anybody misses a beat, just there's a complete train wreck. So definitely, I'm very proud of what the orchestra was able to accomplish with this piece. I remember when I first submitted the program to our musicians, there was a big oh my goodness, there's a lot of brass on this program. And a lot of our brass players were very concerned about how all the stamina, all the playing that is very, very, very difficult in this work or in this complete program. Absolutely. So the heroic effort of the musicians for this program was just amazing. So yeah, I'm very proud of it.
Yeah. So Chavez was one of the first composers who really took the task of trying to establish what Mexican music should sound like, and especially the classical music realm, how he could mix the indigenous influence and the European Spanish influence that we have in our country to create this mestizo, this mixed race classical music. And another composer that kind of followed this path was Silvestre Revueltas. They were very close to each other. Revueltas was about 10 or more years younger, but they worked closely together. Revueltas was even his assistant at the National Symphony in Mexico. And so the next piece we're going to hear is called, and we have this long debate, is it Sensemaya or Sensemaya? What did you research? What was your...
Well, the accent kind of makes it Sensemaya, right? There's the accent. Yeah. Some publications don't have the accent. The written accent goes on the last syllable. So it should be Sensemaya. But, many people even in Mexico call it Sensemaya. It's just one of those things that I just kind of grew up with.
Mm-hmm. So it's the piece is based or inspired by a Cuban poem by a poet named Nicolás Guillén. And the poem evokes an Afro-Caribbean chant performed with a snake. Basically, it's a very kind of obscure and interesting poem. And it has this one phrase, which is a chant from this ritual, which is Mayombe, Bombe, Mayombe. Mm-hmm. And Revueltas takes that chant and turns it into a rhythm, right? That's the basic DNA of this piece, is that phrase from the poem, which Revuelta turns into this rhythm that we hear a lot as a melody in the violins that goes Mayombe, Bombe, Mayombe, Mayombe, Bombe, Mayombe. So that kind of becomes the driving rhythm that basically creates this whole piece. And it also has a very iconic tuba solo at the beginning of the piece. Those are my two takeaways, two things that I love about this piece that make it so unusual. The driving rhythm in the strings and that tuba solo that opens up this whole kind of snake dance.
And there's the bass clarinet doing the dori 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 dori. That is the snake going through the grass, the snake close to the ground. And it's a really hard part for the bass clarinetist because there's no place to breathe. So he or she has to be playing that for a long stretch of time, and it's really, really hard. There's also gestures like the final gesture at the very end is the drop of a knife. You hear the final slaying of the snake. And the poem is based on this enchantment, basically, and it's an offering to the god Babalu. Babalu is supposed to be the god that could give healing or pestilence to the tribe. So we are in a very apropos situation for this piece because with the pandemic, this is the kind of thing that people in that region of the world would have done to try to get rid of it. So since the Maya is I think very appropriate for the times. One of the things that is very interesting about the piece is the rhythms. Of course, most of them are asymmetrical, either 7s or 9s or 11s. So it always feels very unstable, like in constant movement, in constant flow, let's put it this way. And that flow is basically the snake. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about it afterwards, but yeah, that's Sensei Maya.
And it was written after Sinfonia India, right? So we're kind of going in chronological order here.
Correct. It was written in 1937. So Sinfonia India was finished in 1936. We should also mention that both Chavez and Revueltas were born in the same year. They were both born in 1899. So yeah, they're absolute contemporaries. Unfortunately, Revueltas, and we can talk a little bit more about this afterwards, died young. He died in 1940. He was only 41 years old when he died. And he started as a violinist, as a matter of fact, and he was very busy as a violinist. And then he turned into composition kind of late and wrote a few incredible pieces and died. Such a tragic situation.
Yeah, he has like 10 pieces and all of them are basically hits. No, all of them are very much performed, and yeah, who knows
Absolutely.
what he would have written, but Sensei Maya is definitely his greatest hit, I think so.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, enjoy. That was fun to remember. It's such an incredible piece and so intense, and there's so much like dark energy in it that it just really draws you in.
Yeah, it's a different approach as to how Mexico could sound like in a concert setting. No, it's a very different approach, even to like indigenous kind of influences from what we heard from Carlos Chavez to Revueltas.
Yeah, and it shows the variety of a culture, right? I mean, again, how it's so different depending on the region or the times or whatever. It's just a really rich culture. One of the things that I found very interesting about putting this piece together is also how the rhythm becomes kind of hypnotic. You know, after a while, just kind of drives itself, and it has a certain inertia that is almost unstoppable.
Yeah.
And then the only time that the music rests is like 5 bars before the end, and there's silence, and then the final gesture. I think it's extremely effective and extremely innovative, even though a lot of what you hear in this music kind of comes from Stravinsky. Yeah, you hear a lot of the Rite of Spring type of intensity. It has its own very unique character, and that just again goes to show you that Revueltas had so much potential, and again, his life was just cut short.
Yeah, it's even like an expansion of the idea of minimalism, just using one single idea and developing a piece just based on that. That wasn't even a trend yet, and this piece really just takes that pattern develops the whole composition. So that's also pretty unique about Revueltas and this piece.
And you know that this piece started as a chamber piece for 7 instruments. I haven't heard it, but it seems almost impossible to do it with 7 instruments. But it was expanded later. Also, Revueltas was very involved with film music. One of my favorite scores is called Redes, and you probably know it very well. It's a silent film from the 30s, and it's gorgeous to look at. As a matter of fact, it's probably from the best time in cinema in Mexico, the golden era of cinema in Mexico. And the music is just beautiful. But there was a fallout between Revueltas and Chavez because of this piece. Apparently, the commission went to Chavez first. Chavez, the composer that we just heard prior to Revueltas, and for some reason he was taken out of that commission. I think it was a union-related matter, and it was given to Revueltas. And Chavez did not like that at all and took it against Revueltas, apparently, even though Revueltas had nothing to do with it. He just accepted the commission. But apparently after that, even though they had a very good relationship prior to it, as you mentioned, he was his assistant conductor for a while. They just never talked to each other after that. And I think you have some stories as well.
There's a lot of myths about this rivalry because obviously both Chavez and Revueltas were trying to establish this this new sound of what Mexico was. So there's lots of stories that they competed, and they were competing for the post of being just the best composer, and that they apparently didn't like each other. I think they're just legends and myths, and it's just telenovela style drama that has coming about them. But I think they worked together a lot, and they had the same mission. No, they wanted to establish a Mexican sound, and I think composers nowadays, Mexican composers, were very grateful that they kind of established that groundwork for us to keep developing as well.
Absolutely. Now talking about that as a contemporary composer and probably one of the most successful composers in Mexico nowadays, what do you take away from this past, from these composers, from Chavez, Revueltas, Moncayo, Ponce, and other contemporaries like Arturo Marquez, and people that are still with us?
I take away everything. I think they established, so many great influences, so many orchestral colors. Someone was commenting on the YouTube chat, the use of percussion, the rhythms, those were things that weren't really done quite yet in classical music, and Mexican composers really went for it. They used a ton of percussion instruments. So there's a lot I take from these composers, and I always like to think as if I were going to a buffet and I just grab a little bit from each composer, and then when I design my plate that I'm gonna eat, it becomes my own voice and my own style, but it's influenced from all of these pieces and what these composers kind of developed as, what sounds Mexican in classical music.
Do you have a composer, not just from Mexico, but in general, that you admire most?
Manuel Ponce, which is one of the composers you mentioned. He was the first. He was Carlos Chavez's teacher, as you said, piano teacher and composition teacher, and he was really the first composer that really said, okay, let's look at our past. Let's examine how we can use these influences, indigenous melodies, popular tunes, in order to create a new mixture with classical music, and he just did it so well, and from a very honest place. I think that's something that I love about his music. It just sounds so natural. It's very easy to see that this is the music that he loved and that he just wanted to translate and into the classical realm, but it's lovely Mexican sounding music.
And his accomplishments come from the time of the revolution, even before the revolution, which is amazing when you think about it, because Mexico was chaotic for 100 years, war after war after war. And when the revolution ended in 1917, although it really ended in like 1920, 1917 is when the constitution was drafted. Then you have an explosion of composers, right? Revueltas, Chavez, and all of them writing Moncayo in a nationalistic style that became very popular.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Mariachitlan, can you tell us when you wrote it and how it happened? How did it start? How did that project start?
Yeah. So I wrote Mariachitlan in the summer of 2016 for a national competition that the Jalisco Philharmonic organized, and it was a national competition for Mexican composers. So I wrote this piece for that competition. It won that competition, and a few months after that happened, I sent it to you, as we were saying, and I was very fortunate to have it programmed with the Victoria Bach Festival Orchestra. It was the US premiere, so I always like to say that you guys were my good luck charm, because afterwards, the piece, nowadays has been played by 20 orchestras in Mexico, the US, Argentina. It recently got a Latin Grammy nomination, so it has become pretty successful. And as a composer, the best thing is to hear your music played a lot, and that's what's happening with Mariachitlan, and I'm so grateful for that. And the inspiration for this piece, the first thing that came to me was the title. Mariachitlan is a made-up word. Tlan in Mexico or in the Nahuatl language means land. So it's the land of mariachi. And I thought it was a cool title. It sounded very catchy, kind of like Disneyland. And I thought that was gonna, sell and be successful. So first thing I came up with was the title. And then I started to think, okay, since I'm a composer from Jalisco, how can I recreate the experience that is to visit a mariachi plaza in Guadalajara, which is the capital of Jalisco, where I was born. And when you visit mariachi plazas, you hear different ensembles in each corner, kind of interrupting each other. They want to win over the crowd. They're playing with each other. It's kind of like almost like a very comic experience. And what I wanted to do is, in a 10-minute piece, I wanted to expose and explore all of the different mariachi dances or rhythms that we could encounter. So I have the Canción Ranchera, which is a song in 2/4 time that goes like chunta, 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 chunta. So kind of like a fast tempo. Then there's the romantic waltz in 3/4 time. So like chunta, ta, chunta, ta. That's another mariachi style. The son Jalisciense with the Jalisco song. That's in 6/8, so like more of a dancing. So the idea or the challenge behind writing this piece was, can I combine in a single narrative that tells the story about going to this mariachi plaza? Can we hear all of different mariachi rhythms? But what I wanted to do that it was different from what Chavez did is that I wanted to have all original melodies. I didn't want to quote my favorite mariachi melodies. I wanted to write my own melodies that were inspired by mariachi music, but that had these rhythms. And just to give you a heads up, near the end of the piece, there's a policeman that comes in and wants to stop the party. So watch out for that policeman and see what happens after that.
Yeah, the piece, it's so colorful. That's the first thing that struck me. Then it's very colorful, and that's your technique. I mean, there's moments where you actually hear the famous grito of the Mexicans,
Yes.
from the trombones, and it's amazing the effect that you're able to get from that, and then you get the zapateado that you hear, from the harp, and very just very authentic. The sounds sound really like a mariachi band. Um,
Yeah,
and
people think that classical music is like very serious, but us composers, we love comedy, we love telling jokes, telling stories, and so all of that kind of humor is inside the piece. All of the winks that you're saying are in there. There's also a very cool violin solo that Steven played amazingly in a very kind of mariachi style, very fast notes, and that's near the end of the piece, so watch out for that as well.
yeah, and I think it's very honest, because you were born in the land of mariachi. Guadalajara is the land of mariachi. We were both born in the land of mariachi, and you grow up with those things. You grow up with experiences where you're in the middle of a party, and all of a sudden it's 2:00 in the morning, and you start hearing the mariachi, and they all come through the door, and they stay playing for your party for 3 hours, and then they go to another party, and it's just part of our culture. And I think the piece reflects that. I think it would have to be somebody with your blood from Guadalajara, and your technique, your ability to imagine and envision these sounds and turn them into classical notation, which is really, really difficult to do.
And I must give a shout out both to you and the orchestra. I remember the rehearsals and everything. The process was so warm. Like each musician was very committed to this new piece. It's never easy to do a premiere, and especially a piece that doesn't have a lot of history. You're pretty much seeing the music for the first time, and you have to make it happen. So I'm so grateful when musicians commit to the music and really communicate something. As a composer, that's the dream, when you're just sitting in the audience and just taking all of this in. And I remember that was so special. That connection I made with you and the orchestra was incredible. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. But from my perspective as a conductor, I am so grateful for the musicians in the festival. It's an amazing group. We put concerts together with a very limited amount of time, half of the time that you would dedicate to in a full season orchestra to each program, and they commit to it, and they work on their own, and they come together open to sharing, and it's like chamber music in a large scale, and that's something that I try to communicate, and it's something that my predecessor Craig, I think, also injected into the ensemble, and I'm just kind of inheriting that. But in fact, that's the way I work, because the New Orchestra of Washington, which is another organization which I lead in Washington, D.C., my wife and I founded that organization about 8 years ago. It's an orchestra of soloists, just one at a part, and I think that chamber music making, even though you need a conductor because of the complexity of the music that we do, kind of translates beautifully in a large ensemble. But you need people that are willing to go with it, and I think we have those people at the Victoria Bach Festival. Not only incredible musicians individually, which we have witnessed this week with all their online offerings, but also when they come collectively work together. I'm being redundant. When they work together, they just transfer this energy to each other, and it's really amazing music making.
It's a very positive energy, and you'll see in the video that they enjoy making music together, and I can tell you that's something that we value so much as composers, as conductors. Like when the whole orchestra is kind of vibing together, connecting, and wants to achieve the same goal, it's incredible what happens in the music making that comes out of that.
Absolutely. Well, let's enjoy Mariachitlan.
All right, Mariachitlan.
Oh, that was so fabulous. I remember the energy in the room that night. That was just such a great piece. Thank you so much for coming back and revisiting it with us. I remember you had family in from Mexico as well.
Yeah. I have family from San Antonio, Texas, and from Mexico. Visit and attended the concert. We had a really great time. I'm so surprised looking back or hearing back the mariachi solos, the trumpets were so amazing. I didn't remember like how Mexican they sounded. It's not easy. There's really no notation for it. I just wrote in the score Mexican mariachi style, and they just knew what to do. And even the violin solo, like everything was so idiomatic to mariachi music, which I didn't remember. It went so well.
We had a few tequilas before the performance. That helped.
There you go.
No, it's amazing. I know it's amazing to see Steven, for example, who is the finest Baroque player you can imagine, do a mariachi solo so convincingly.
I remember we spoke with him after a rehearsal, and he was and I was like, you need to like sound like more like rough and like scratchier. And he was like, are you sure? I said, no, I'm sure.
Are you sure?
And he went for it. He made it sound so authentic and so amazing. So yeah, it was
So for our audience, how does it feel to hear a piece for the first time as a composer? What goes through your mind?
It's if it's a great orchestra like this one, it's such a pleasure. You just sit back and it just take it in, and it's unbelievable. I mean composing is such a lonely process. You're just basically by yourself in front of a piece of paper, working, imagining sounds that when you get there to a rehearsal or a performance, it's like you feel like you crash a party. You're in this party with 100 people, and you're like, was I invited? Like it feels very surreal. But once the music starts to sink in, it's just the best feeling, and it's always interesting. I mean, this piece has been done 20 or so times. Each time you learn something new about your own composition because the conductor adds a lot. Injects their style into the piece. Discovers things that maybe I didn't think of in the piece. Is able to highlight certain things. So it's always a learning experience and always interesting to give it to someone else and allow them to make it their own. And I think that's the best thing as a composer. Once you write the piece and you put it out there to the world, it just takes its own life. And recently, when I released this in an album with the Jalisco Philharmonic, the album that got the Latin Grammy nomination, we did a tour with 7 orchestras in Mexico, a total of 11 concerts. And it was just great to hear those different versions. It sounded so new, so different with each orchestra. And you grow so much as a composer and learn new things about your own music with just seeing how other musicians and other conductors, bring it to life. So it was really great.
And what kind of relationship do you hope to establish with the conductor? Because the conductor is mostly the person that determines, the pacing, the phrasing, etc., right? Of course, you need brilliant musicians like the ones that we have to make it happen. But ultimately, the conductor is in charge of kind of requesting, certain things from the musicians. What do you hope for in a relationship with a conductor? I mean, what's what you're looking for?
Honestly, what I loved about working with you is that you were so open to collaboration and communication. A lot of conductors just say like you wrote the recipe for the thing. Now this is my kitchen. I'm gonna cook it. Don't even sneak in. This is my thing, and I love it when there's more of that collaboration, that opportunity to say, yes, I like this, but let's try this, or what do you think of when it's a mixed, a collaboration where both parties are happy with the end result. And I think that's what happened with this performance. You really made it amazing. Also, being from Jalisco, from Guadalajara, I think you had all of that DNA of the piece, in your own body. So you knew where to dance, how to move things, how to shake the things up. So that was fantastic. But it is rare for a composer, or it is very special for a composer to be able to attend rehearsals, to be able to give comments, to be able to address the orchestra and ask for certain request, as we were mentioning with Steven the solo. those are very special things for a composer. So
it's a luxury for conductors to have a composer at hand, right? Because we all wish that we knew all the answers directly from Beethoven or Haydn or whoever, no? But obviously we have to rely on the score and books to find out what they wanted. But in our case, with composers that are living, you have all the answers right there, and you have to just be open to those suggestions, because ultimately it's all coming from your soul and from your brain, and we are just vessels, right? We're just trying to give birth to the music that you created. So it's really amazing to be able to go directly to the creator and ask for feedback.
Absolutely.
It was a fantastic piece, and we were all dancing. I remember there were people dancing in their seats that night.
Yeah.
So we do have a question here from Paula Cobbler about what you might be working on now. What are some of your new compositions?
So this year I worked on a very special piece called Lucha Libre, which is Mexican wrestling. It hasn't been premiered yet, but it was commissioned by the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. And my idea was to have 6 of the musicians, basically feature 6 soloists that wear luchador masks. And basically you have 2 teams, so the rudos, the bad guys, versus the técnicos, basically sitting in opposite sides of the orchestra. So it's a wrestling match where you hear, so basically each character has their own theme, and those themes fight against each other, 1 against 1, 2 against 2, and then in the climax, 3 against 3. So that's my most recent composition. And I was recently awarded a New Music USA grant project called Amplifying Voices. And I'll be able to work with a consortium of orchestras led by the Las Vegas Philharmonic, and I think Richmond Symphony is participating, and California Symphony. So I'm going to write something new and something very much related with Mexican American communities. I've been living in the US for the past 15 years, so I think I'm part of that experience of what it's like to come to a new country and be embraced so warmly by the United States. So the piece will tell a story about that, the success, and what happens when border cities, border states kind of take both cultures and mix it into a new one. And so I'm looking forward to working on that soon.
Fabulous. We look forward to hearing it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so much fun to go back and revisit that concert and to get some more information and hear from you. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And if you enjoyed what you heard tonight, we encourage people to go to victoriabachfestival.org and find that donate button so we can continue to make great music in the years to come. Thank you so much, Juan Pablo, for joining us. Alejandro, it's been a great week. We do want to, as we're closing out here, have a little shout out to a couple of very special people who worked with us this week. Thomas Vanderbrook of Tone House Productions, who did all of our video editing, and Russell Fowler, who was our live stream director. It's been a fabulous week, and they put in a lot of work to make all of this happen. So thanks to them. Thanks to you. And we'll look forward to hearing more in the years to come.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody.